In the mid-1970s, when you were doing the work which eventually led to this paper in Demography, the fall in household size and the rise of the primary individual, what kind of issues were prominent in demographic circles at that point? What kind of ideas were going around that led you to this topic?
Well, that's an interesting leading question because it makes an assumption. But in fact, I think that this came out of left field for the field, which is to say, I did a dissertation which I thought was on consumer units. It was a thesis in demography at Penn, and I was looking at household headship, sort of constructed the way we did labor force participation rates, what proportion of people of a given age in marital status were household heads, which followed along some of the economic work of Richard Easterlin, who had done some sort of long swings and discovered that in times of prosperity, household formation increases, and put it down essentially to marriage. I was much less interested in the sort of big macro question at that point. It just sounded like an interesting dissertation to look at consumer units and whether they were getting smaller, I think was part of sort of how I saw it. But since I left graduate school after prelims and really an approved proposal and spent 2 years teaching in a sociology department, I think 9 sections of introductory sociology, I discovered in the course of writing my thesis that I was really writing about families. And not consumer units at all, or not only consumer units. So the interesting way to think about what I was observing was the undoubling of unmarried persons from family households. That if you look at data on who lives with whom and who's head of the household over time by age, I was doing 1940, 50, and 60 at that point, you see an enormous increase in household headship rates, which is what I call them then, which you could now think of in the more macro sense as an undoubling of unmarried young adult children and primarily widowed older generation from family environments. And it's interesting because if I had started to do a dissertation in those years on family change, everything I read, or would have read, and I didn't read it, that's the point, would have told me that there wasn't any. Because this was the time of the reaction against sort of the waning of the traditional family, the waning of the extended family. Everybody was celebrating the modified extended family, and either all families had always been nuclear, which was sort of Peter Laslet's argument, or else that they certainly hadn't always been extended, and if they...
Some sort of stem, something.
Yeah, well, but they weren't even that sophisticated. It was sort of a once upon a time, it was a rejection against the once upon a time we all lived in 3-generation families with grandma happily ever after, because people were starting to look essentially at cross-sectional data, which showed that the vast proportion of families were nuclear. Now, the problem with data of that sort is that if you don't take into account the age structure of the population, then there are very few people to extend with in a high fertility, high mortality population. What you're seeing, all of the old people may well be living with their children, there are just so few of them that most families don't have old people. But because I was looking at these household headship rates, I could see over a 20-year period enormous increase in old people living alone.
And some young, too.
Well, those were the two big parts. The two ends of the adult age span is where the enormous increase in separate living was occurring. Now, of course, 1940 was still the end of the Depression in economic terms, and by 1960 we had a fair amount of expansion. So there were things going on, but many more people have looked at those data over the since then and said that it's not all money, no matter how we measure money or rents or costs or anything, but there's definitely a serious expectation that if it's not 2 married couples, it's definitely not supposed to be 2 generations. A term that's used commonly these days is something called minimal household units, that if you're unmarried and over some age, 15, 20, 25, whatever, you should have your own place. And so any household that contains these extras, is somehow extended. So that's a very stringent definition of the nuclear family. Anyway, so I'd done a dissertation on this, and I knew that there was serious family change going on out there, even if nobody else thought so. And I wanted to give a paper at the PAA. It was just that simple. And I said, well, let me see if I can come up with some historical series on household size, because I saw this undoubling must be leading to smaller households. So I pulled together a series that, you can't get a lot of data on living arrangements or anything in earlier censuses, but I just pulled together a series on number of persons per household, and then broke it down a few other ways to get number of adults per household. And then I made a graph that tracked the change in household size with the age structure, because I was intrigued by the fact that here were all these people living alone, but and undoubling, but there hadn't been that many living with their, household size hadn't really declined that much.
Mm-hmm.
And what you can see, of course, if you're a demographer, because most people studying family change weren't demographers.
Right.
But if you're a demographer, you think in terms of the whole age distribution. You think about age pyramids and so forth, and the enormous expansion of the elderly. Demographers know, but they don't think about who lives with whom. And people who are looking at families say, hey, there wasn't anybody, nobody had old folks living with them, but they don't think demographically that there wasn't any old folks to live with people. So I created sort of a cute ratio, which I think was called later the mother-daughter ratio, which sort of tracked the fall in household size against the number of adult children per elderly woman, I think is what it was, and then talked about different ways this could be measured, and they all show pretty much the same structure, so that I could make the argument that the early part of the decline in household size was probably a decline in fertility, but the later part of it was really a undoubling of these sort of extra mothers from their children's household. It was a totally macro argument. It was not.
Well, you have several components in there. There's the fall in fertility, and there's the increasing survivorship.
Right.
Gap
Joint
between the men and
survivorship
the
of
women.
couples, right.
And there's the more divorce and no remarriage.
Right.
But you also had the economic component in there too, the increasing prosperity, right?
Well, in those days, everyone was, that began sort of the economic model of headship.
Mm-hmm.
A few years later, Bob Michael wrote an article and
Right.
so forth. And I always had trouble as a sociologist with some of the economic arguments, because what they imply is that if we all had enough money, we would all live alone.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
That's
right.
their logic. They
We
sort
all
of
wanna be
leave.
alone.
They leave marriage separately.
This is the Marlena Dietrich theory of human nature.
Yeah, right. And as a sociologist, I don't really buy it. I think there are, under the right circumstances, major gains to relationships. That people, that social ties are not just balls and chains. They're not just nooses around your neck. That they are all can be supports
People like
and companionship and shared goals, histories, happinesses. That if marriage is seen as positive, then there are probably other relationships that can be sustaining if you construct them properly.
Maybe even parents and children.
Maybe even parents and children.
As you
More
were,
recently, I sort of push in this direction more, but
as
that's
you
the
were
history.
working on this project and thinking about these and putting together your data, who, if anybody, did you talk to about this? What kind of interactions did you have with other scholars, fellow colleagues in the field?
Seriously, I was not sustained in any way. Having been started with this set of ideas from my committee, I went off and wrote my dissertation on my own, which I felt very isolated
You were off campus.
doing. I was off campus.
Yeah.
I was trying to do it in the midst of a teaching schedule and small children, and somehow finishing everything at the same time. Probably the only reason I ever finished it is because the institution that gave me a job made the error of believing me when I said I would be finished when I started, so they gave me rank and salary, and I was so embarrassed by the fact that I was being treated as a real grown-up when I hadn't finished my dissertation, that I sort of had to. But no, I was on my own, very much so. In fact, I gave a job interview at Brown, and I said maybe I will be a grown-up and go to a research institution. I was teaching near where my husband was working at that point. And when I gave the job interview at Brown, I said, hey, finally I'm going to be where they're real demographers and they'll know what I'm talking about. I'll be able to get interchange and support and so forth. And they didn't, because they didn't know anything about living arrangements. They didn't know anything about census terms. They were into a very individualistic data model, whether it's
The atomized model of
right,
society.
right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they were learning how to run individual models, but they didn't see aggregates in any way. And I think the fact that I started with aggregate data that was relational by definition, the household headship, relationship to head of household, requires you to think about two people, the way in which respondents' education does not.
And this didn't resonate very well.
Well, they didn't know what I was talking about,
Yeah.
actually. But somehow they forgave me and gave me the job.
Well, to their benefit in the long run, as it's turned out. What have you heard in reaction to this paper since it came out? How have people responded to it?
Well, you don't hear too much, but it's been collected a couple of times in, I think actually people like the historical dimension to it, even though the heart of the data analysis is 40 to 60, but by having these couple of long-term introductory little tables and little graphs, the historians like it. So Michael Gordon put it in his History of the American Family Reader.
That's how I started assigning it.
Right, and I was very flattered that he did that. And actually Doug Wolf came through, who does very interesting research on the living arrangements of the elderly, and said that my mother-daughter graph had turned his entire thinking around about how to think about co-residence. So I was very flattered about that.
That's good. That's great.
It's cited a lot when my department thinks about renewing people and promoting people and so forth. Someone goes off to some citation index and tries to find out whether anybody's paying any attention, and it is still cited a lot. So even though it's not terribly recent, I think part of it is that because it was first,
Right.
in some fairly basic sense. I mean, there are other sort of papers
Original
around.
ideas.
Well, it's sort of weird. It came out of left field, but. There are a lot of people now doing household and family demography, not so much actually on living arrangements.
Yeah.
It's still pretty narrow. People are doing a lot more, demographers are doing a lot more marriage, a lot more thinking about children in the context of families and fathers and all of that, so that we've gotten a long way from simple fertility models where it doesn't matter what happens to the children the minute after they're born or who their parents are or anything. How do you deal with the double sex model? The demography I learned as I grew up has become more socially informed, I think. But still, the living arrangements part of it is still somewhat esoteric. There was an entire session this morning on leaving home, which is even more esoteric.
Yeah, I wasn't able to go to that one. Do you see this as having had an impact that changed? Well, you already mentioned Doug Wolf, but do you think it's changed the general direction of research in any particular way, given a new angle?
Well, it's hard now to sort of deny that there hasn't been really serious in the sense of substantial change in family structure. And that people then had to say, why is it when I looked at things my way, I saw a big change, but when they looked at things the other way, you don't. If you look at it from the point of view of the middle generation, you see much less change than if you look at it from the older generation.
Right.
So the issue of what side you look at things from matters a lot. And some of that's sort of a demographic puzzle, but it's also, what is that?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very